Alright, we'll say good morning. Let's begin. Today's daf is Yud Ches 18, and we are starting from Yud Ches. We're starting second line down from the top, Yud Ches Amud Aleph. Ve'ela. So, remember again, we left off in the middle of the sugya concerning whether or not an arusa, a woman who is widowed or divorced from Erusin, does she have a kesuva or not? So remember again, from the kasha of Abaye made it sound like that an arusa automatically has a ksuva. But we were also discussing whether, so even though Abaye begins by saying that's a fait accompli, we were discussing at the end of the day whether or not that's actually true. So we'll see actually, you know what, I'll do it in a moment. One second, bless you. Fine, we'll come back to this. We'll do the halach in just a moment. So the Gemara says, rather, if you want to see if an arusa has iksuva, we can learn from Rabbi Shmuel Silber. What does Rabbi Shmuel Silber say? Ishto arusa lo onein v'lo mitamelo. So we'll say the halacha is that if this is talking about a kohen, that if a kohen performed erusin with a woman, lo onein, if she dies, he does not become an onein. Remember again, aninos is the state between death and burial, where the mourner is exempted from all positive mitzvos. So if the Kohen performed erusin with a woman and then she died, he does not become an onin. V'lo metamela. Furthermore, again, he cannot become tummy for her. V'chein hi lo onenes v'lo metamelo. Furthermore, again, she does not become an onenes, nor does she become tummy for him. Now I will say, now if you look at Rashi says v'lo metamelo lav mishum kahuna ka'amar de'ein kahanos musharos al tumah d'chsibnei Aaron ela eina zekuka litamelo lo kohanes v'lo Yisraelis shemitzvah lehes asik b'shiva mesi mitzvah ha'amurim b'parsha d'chsiv lo yitama. So we'll say when it says that she does not become tummy for him, of course that's not a din in kahuna. A kohenes, right? A woman from a kohanic family does not have the halachos concerning abstaining from tumah. What it means when it says that she does not become tamei for him, it means she does not have an obligation to become tamei for him. In other words, what that means is the following. The halacha is that you have an obligation to take care of the levaya, the burial needs, for the 7 close relatives: a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a son, a daughter, and a spouse. What it's saying over here is that when she has erusin with this man, she is not responsible ultimately to take care of his burial needs. Meisa Eina Yarsha. If she dies, he does not inherit her. Meisu, but if he dies, Govek Ksuvasa. She inherits her Ksuva. So both sides. So there seems to be a pretty explicit proof that what? That even a woman from erusin does in fact get a Ksuva. To which the Gemara says, well, one second, Dilma de Kasavla. Maybe the case that we're talking about over here, Abosai, is where he wrote for. In other words, that he willingly obligated himself in ksuva for her, but that's only because he actively obligated himself. But there is no de facto obligation for ksuva from erusin. V'chitema de kasavla ma'ila memra. But Abosai, that's true that he wrote for her a ksuva, meaning that he willingly committed himself to ksuva for her. Then what's the chiddush? What's the novelty in the brayso? So why does anything have to be said? To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you, Meisa Eina Yarsha Itzrichalei. You need the brayso needed to say the clause that if she dies, he does not inherit her. So the Gemara says, Ela Abaye. So therefore, we'll say, therefore, this brayso does not provide any conclusive proof that Narusa has a ksuva, because again, we could explain away this case as a situation of a husband willingly obligating himself in ksuva, and therefore again, no raya that Narusa always has a ksuva. Rather, I will say, when Abaye went ahead and retracted his position, as you saw in Amud Beis yesterday, he did it based on the Mishnah itself. If you look at Rashi, Ala Abaye to Amr La'el, Lav Milsihi Da'amri. When Abaye retracted his position from yesterday, so there the Gemara says, Migufa Demas Nisin Do Tzia Get Mishum Dehi Gufa Kasha. So he retracted his position based on the original statement of the Mishnah. Why? What happened? Tisakadaitcha b'makom shen kosvin ksuva askinon. So because Abaye said, if you want to say that we're talking about a place where they don't normally write a ksuva, right? If that's how you want to understand the case of the Mishnah and Gin, they're talking about a situation where they don't normally write a ksuva. The get hainu ksuvasa, and in that case again, her get is her actual ksuva. Atu get manu masayin ksivbe. Let's say again, does the get actually have in it a clause that tells you how much she collects, whether she collects 100 or she collects 200? V'chitema kevan ditakinu Rabbanon lemigvala kiman de kasav beidami. Maybe you'll say that since the Rabbanon said that you could collect with this ksuva, therefore what? It's as if it is written either mana or masayim into the get itself. To which the Gemara says, if that's the case, liton v'lema parati, let the husband claim, I paid it already. I was supposed to say, just because she goes in and she produces a get, why can't he counterclaim and say, I went ahead and I paid this debt already? Because maybe we could tell him, look, if it's true that you went ahead and you paid it already, then what? You should have ripped the get. In other words, we're both saying that the way it would work is the following. In communities or in locales where they did not write a ksuva, and therefore again, the get itself was the mechanism for collection of the ksuva, in those communities what they would do is after the husband went ahead and paid off the ksuva, they would tear up the get, which makes sense, because again, effectively, the get represents the note of indebtedness, right? Therefore, again, once the note has been paid, so in that case, the husband would go ahead and tear up the get in order to ensure that the wife could not collect the ksuva again. So, if we're talking about a case where in a community where they don't write a ksuva, therefore the get is the ksuva. Wife shows up and says, here's my get, I never got paid. Husband says, I paid you. We could counterclaim to the husband and say, what? Really? If you paid her, what should you have done? Should have ripped up the get. Amar Lan, he could have said to us, Lo shav kasan. Well, I tried, but she wouldn't let me. Why not? Amra ba'ina le'ensube bay. Because she said, I can't let you tear up my get. You know why? I need it to get remarried with it. In other words, I need that get to serve as proof for my ability to get remarried. V'chitema amrin alay ibaylacha lemikre umichtav agabe gita dinan dekarenu. So I'm sorry, let's go back. So, but maybe we could counterclaim to him and say, listen, you should have still gone ahead and torn it up. You should have torn it. Now, you don't have to shred the whole thing to pieces, but you could tear it up in a way that prevents the document from being used again. And right on the other side of it, or right on top of it, Gita dinan, this get, dikarenu, that we tore, lav mishum de Gita psuluhu. We didn't tear it because it's a get puzzle. Rather, we tore it. Why? In order that the woman not be able to collect with it a second time. To which the Gemara says, so that's what we say to the husband. To which the Gemara gives an interesting answer. Atu called the Magbi, the Beidina Magbi. Do you think that all people, this is a great answer, and this is a great answer when this whole thing is taking place in front of Beis Din. Do you think that every single time one wants to collect her ksuva, she's doing it in front of Beis Din? Look at Rashi. Atu kol de magbi beveidina magbila v'chi kol ha'parei achov ba lebeis din b'makom sheparalo lo haya Beis Din sheyichtivu lo kein. So do you think that every single time a woman comes for collection for her ksuva, that she's doing it in front of Beis Din, that there's a Beis Din present to write this entire formulation? In other words, this is a great suggestion the Gemara is making, as long as this process is occurring in front of skilled people who know how to write this verbiage. But do we automatically assume that every single time one wants to collect a ksuva, it's happening in front of a Beis Din? The answer to that, of course, is no. Therefore, again, the husband could claim, I tried to do all of this, but ultimately the woman would not give me the document to go ahead and record the payment of the ksuva on it. So we'll say, so just with this piece, so how do we paskin? So interestingly enough, the Shulchan Aruch paskins, this is in, I'll quote it to you, this is in Even HaEzer, Siman Nun Hey, Sif Vav. So the Shulchan Aruch says the following. Remember, we're talking specifically about whether or not an arusa, a woman in Erusin, has a ksuva or not. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins, Hama'ares es ha'isha v'kasav l'ksuva. If a man does Erusin with a woman, and he wrote a ksuva for her, v'lo kansa l'chuppah, and he did not yet do nisuin, so adayin arusahi ve'eino nisua. She'ena ksuva osa nisuin. So first point the Shulchan Aruch writes is that if you did erusin, and then you wrote a ksuva, bless you, and then you wrote a ksuva, so a ksuva does not affect nisuin. That's first order business. Okay, I guess it's a havamina that ksuva itself would affect nisuin. We don't pass in that way. Ve'im meis o girsha. Now, what happens if he died or if he divorced her? So what's the halacha? Gove ikir ksuva mibnei chari ve'ina gove tosefes klal hoil velo insa klinsa. So we'll say Shalom makes an interesting distinction. Let's say that ksuva has two parts. That ksuva has ikir and it has tosefes. It has the primary amount, which is the 100 or the 200, but then the husband added additional amounts as well. Shalom makes an interesting distinction. She can go already from Erusin, he commits himself to ikir ksuva. Therefore, if he dies before nisuin, he or his estate, or he or divorces her or dies before nisuin, either he or his estate has to pay the ikir ksuva to the woman, but not the tosefes, not any additional amounts. So the Gemara says, "Avalam ires isha v'lo kasav l'ksuva u'meiso girsha v'yarusa ina lo klum v'afilu ha'ikr shel tiknu la ikr ksuva ad shetinase ad sheyata." So we'll say, "Salach l'maisa." Through the Shalom Paskins is like this: if he did not write a ksuva, there is no ksuva obligation for erusin. Okay, that's halacha l'maisa. If he decided to write a ksuva, so we assume that what that means is he decided to obligate himself from Erusin, but only obligates himself in ikr ksuva, not in tosefes ksuva. Tosefes ksuva only becomes binding as of nisuin. Therefore, were he to die or to divorce her from Erusin, he or his estate would only be obligated for ikr ksuva, but that's only in the event that what? That he wrote the ksuva itself. But if there was no ksuva that was written, then einachinami halacha l'maisa we paskin, there is no automatic obligation for ksuva engendered by Erusin. Good. Says the Mishnah. Supposed to listen to this. Still going on the topic of finding shtaros. I find divorce documents, emancipation documents, daitiki. Daitikin are deathbed wills. Deathbed wills. Or matana, gift documents, shovrim, receipts. Hare ze lo yachzir. You cannot return these items to their owners. Why not? Shani Omer, ksuvin hayu, because I could say that they were written, v'nimlach aleyan shlo litnan. But perhaps the person who wrote the document had a change of heart and decided not to give it. Therefore, for that reason, you may not go ahead and give this document to the owners. Says the Gemara, Taima dinimlach shlo litnan. So we'll say, so the reason ultimately we do not return these items to their owners. So for example, we'll say, I find a get in the street. So I can't return that get to the husband. Why? Because I assume, or to the wife for that matter, because I assume that maybe the husband decided to write it, but then what? But didn't give it. Decided not to give it. Same thing with all of these things. So the Gemara says, well, so now let's analyze this. Taima, the reason you can't return the get to the owner is the nimlach shlo litnan, because we assume that perhaps, or choshesh perhaps, that the quote-unquote owner of the document had a change of heart and chose not to carry through with the transaction. Ha'amar tnu, but listen to this. Let's say I find the get, and I say, Ruvain, I found the get that you wrote for your wife. He said, oh yeah, do me a favor, give it to her. Give it to her. Ha'amar tnu, no snin. It sounds like we would give it to her, va'afilu lizman meruba. And even if what? Even if the get wasn't found until some time later on. Rashi says, no snin, va'afilu nimtza lizman meruba, misha nafal, v'lo chayshinon shema get acherhu, sheshmoseyan shavin ume adam acher nafal. So also listen to this. So the Gemara suggests the following. So the Mishnah Paskins, I'm walking in the street, I find a get that was written from Ruvain to his wife, Leah. And it was written, again, it's dated 6 months ago. What happened? So the Mishnah says, I can't give it back to Ruvain or to Leah. Why? Right? Because why? Because I'm choshesh that I don't know what happened over here. I just don't know what happened over here. So the Gemara says, and maybe Ruvain intended to go ahead and give the get, but what? He chose not to. He chose not to. So the Gemara says, what we can infer from this is, if I tell Ruvain, I found the get you wrote to your wife Leah, and Ruvain says to me, give it to her, that we would listen to him. Now we'll say, what's the novelty in that statement? The novelty in that statement is, we're not choshesh for the fact that maybe there's another couple, Ruvain and Rachel, Ruvain and Leah, and this was their get. This was their get, not the get belonging to the Ruvain and Leah that I think about belonging to another Ruvain and Leah. To which the Gemara says, but is that true? Aren't we choshesh? That's Raminu. Let's raise a kasha. Maybe get following himenu. But if a person was bringing a get, This is a shaliach. Shaliach's bringing a get. Vavar himenu, and he lost it. And what happened? Matzola alter. If he finds it immediately, kosher, he is permitted to go ahead and give it to the intended woman. Imlav pasal. But if he does not find it immediately, then the get is pasal. Now, the logic behind that seems to be that's what? Because if he finds it immediately, we assume that's what? The get that he found is the get that he lost. But if there's a significant amount of time that elapses, we're choshesh that maybe another couple with the same names also lost a get, and the get that he found is not the get that he lost, and therefore again it is not kosher to be used for divorce for the original couple. So we'll say, so now we have a contradiction, right? Remember, based on what the Gemara said, its inference from the Mishnah is we would infer from the Mishnah that even if you find the get sometime later on, as long as the husband says what? As long as he says what? Tenu, give it, then that's enough. But yet the Brisa over here says, no, the only time you could give it if you lost it is if when? Is if you find it immediately. Amar Rabba, so Rabba says, no kasha, it's not a contradiction. Kan b'makom shashayaros mitzuyos. Kan b'makom she'in hashayaros mitzuyos. To which Rabba says, it's not a contradiction. One is talking about a case where the caravans are frequently found, and one is talking about a case where the caravans are not frequently found. We'll say, in other words, stated how? In other words, how do you state this? That it depends on the amount of pedestrian traffic. When do we say that if you find it immediately, you can go ahead and what? Return it. That's only talking about what? That's only talking about a situation where that's talking about a situation where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic. In that case, I'm concerned that if I don't find it immediately, the get that I find is not the one that I lost. Versus a place where there's not a lot of pedestrian traffic, which is what? Even if I find it sometime later on, nevertheless, the get will still be good because I assume the one that I found is the one that I lost. Now, Rabbi takes this one step further. And even in a place where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, you know, when I say pedestrians are literally caravans. So even if there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, Shnei Yosef ben Shimon bi'ir achos. Now, we'll say, Rabbi adds on another caveat. Rabbi says, in order to be choshesh for another couple with the same names that may have lost also a get, they may have also lost the get, there have to be two factors in play. Number one, a lot of pedestrian traffic. And number two, I know for a fact that there's another couple with the same names in the same city. If you have those two factors, that there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, and I know for a fact that what? That there's another couple with the same name in the same city, those two factors combined say that if you lose the get, and you don't retrieve it immediately, you have to be choshesh that the get you found is not the get you lost. Because if you don't say this, kashe de Rabba ad Rabba, then Rabba say Rabba himself contradicts himself. How so? So let's listen to this. They one time found the get in the basin of Rav Huna. And we'll say the get, remember, get also has, interestingly enough, as opposed to a ksu, which doesn't have this, get records location. Right, a get actually seems to have a get has to be its location actually, and it's actually written. We saw Singin. You have to write, B'masa, Baltimore, Al Yad, Patapsco River. It has to be literally. You have to go ahead and note the closest body of water. So the Gemara says they found the get in the basin of Rav Huna, B'Shviri de Masa Da'al Rachis Nara, and it said in Shviri Masa that was on the Rachis River. Some Rav Huna said, Amud Beis, Shaychinon l'shnei Shviri. So we'll say, interestingly enough, we have to go ahead and be choshesh for what? We have to be choshesh that there are two cities named Shviri. Look at Rashi. Chaychinon l'shnei Shviri. Afal pi shaba echel afanei v'arim menu nafal. Uploni hayim shachol l'ishtav yodin. Anu shein b'Shviri shnei l'shnei Shviri shavin. Chayshinon Shem Shviri Acheres V'Yishbe Yosef Ben Shimon Acheres. So this is actually a very interesting shita. So it comes along Rav Huna and says that we have to be choshesh that maybe there are two towns named Shviri. So the Gemara says, Rav Chisda l'Rabba. So Rav Chisda said to Rabba, and he said to Rabba the following: Puk ayin be'bala orta. So Rav Chisda said to Rabba, do me a favor, go and look into this. Go and look into this matter. de la orta boi minach Rav Huna. Because tonight Rav Huna is going to ask you about this particular case, and is going to ask you to weigh in regarding these circumstances. So what happened? Nafak dak va'ashkach. So Rabbi did a little bit of research, and he went out and he found, what did he find? Kol ma'isa bezdin hareze yachzir. So we'll say he found the Braisa that said, we actually learned this yesterday, that any ma'isa bezdin, any document performed by bezdin is always returned back to its owners. Look at Rashi. Kol ma'isa bezdin hareze yachzir. Kol milsa da asala bezdin lekayim. Any document that comes to bezdin for bezdin to uphold, deleka lemechash lenimlach aleish lo nitlan harezi yachzir v'zemekuyam bebezdin hi ulakach huva sham. So we'll say, so Rabbi went out and found any document that is upheld by bezdin, ultimately is returned to its owners. V'habe dina de Rav Huna dechi makom shashayeros mitzuyos dami. Listen to this. So essentially, what Rabbi Paskind was what? Return the get to the shaliach. Return the get to the shaliach. Okay, now let's play this out for just a moment. So Rabbi comes along and says the get should be returned to the shaliach. Now let's analyze this. Let's analyze this ruling. Vaha beidina de Rav Huna dechi makom shashayeros mitzuyos dami. Now both say the basin of Rav Huna was considered to be like a place where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, right? Because at the end of the day, remember, there are a lot of people going back and forth. So therefore, again, it's like a makom shasheres mitzuyos, v'kapashit rabba diyachzir. And yet, even though there's an incredible amount of pedestrian traffic, Rabba paskin that what? The lost get should be returned to its owner. And I will say, now we're contradicting ourselves, right? Because Rabba just said before that if shayaros are mitzuyos, if there's a lot of pedestrian traffic and the document is lost, you have to be choshesh that maybe the document you found is not the document you lost. Here Rabba is saying that in a place of pedestrian traffic, you can return the document. So which one is it? Alma ihochsaku shnei Yosef ben Shimon in lo. Rather, Rabba will say, what do you see? You see from here that it depends. What does it depend on? It depends whether or not, again, there were two Yosef ben Shimons who said, in other words, let me go back. Remember, again, the Gemara made a further distinction in Rabbah. When does Rabbah say that if you lose the document and there's shayros, there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, that you can't return it to the owner? It's not just enough to have pedestrian traffic. What else do you need? You need to know that there are two people with the same name in the same city. If you have those two factors, then you have to be choshesh that the document you lost is not the document you found. But even if there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, but you don't know for sure that there's someone else with the same name, you can return the document. Therefore, the Gemara is suggesting over here that in this situation of the Beis and Rav Huna, in this particular case, there was not a second person that had the same name as the people named in the shtar, and that's why Rabbah allowed it to be returned. So we'll say, so where we're holding right now is that Shitas Rabbah is the following. If you lose a document, and you're losing it in a place that, number one, satisfies two criteria. Number one, Sheyaros Mitzuyos, there's a lot of pedestrian traffic. And number two, Huksuku Shnei Shimon. Right? We've established that there are two people with the same name in the same city. That's where Rabbah holds that Lamaisa, if you lose the document cannot be returned. I have a concern that perhaps the document you lost is not the document you found. But if either of those two criteria are missing, Rabbah will allow for the return of the document. Why? Because we assume ultimately again that the document that was lost is the document that was found. So Avad Rabbah Uvda Bahugita Deshtachach Bekisna de Pumpadisa Kishmaite. So the Gemara just says Rabbah conducted himself in accordance with his ruling regarding a get that was found Bekisna. Most of Bekisna means at the place where they would process straw. Kisna straw. So that's a place where they would process straw in Pumpadisa. So Ikeda Amri, so the Gemara just analyzes this case. Ikeda Amri, so some say, Heicha de Mezabne Kisna. We're talking about a place where they used to sell the straw. So they sell the straw. And both say, now the place where they sell straw is a place where Sheras Mitzuyos, a lot of pedestrian traffic, and therefore, again, according to that version, the reason why Rabbah allowed for the return of the get was because in this particular place they did not have established fact of two people with the same name. Vikadamri, others say that Heicha Ditaru Kisna, that it's a place ultimately again where they soaked the straw, or the flax, I should say, not the straw, the flax. I'm sorry. Va'afagav dehuchsaku. And even though, again, there were two people in the same town by the name of Yosef and Shimon, but so it was a place ultimately, again, where there was not a lot of pedestrian traffic. So the Gemara is just bringing down the fact that Rabbah didn't just say this in a vacuum, but again, Rabbah actually paskined this way, halacha l'maisa. Namely, that again, in order to go ahead and be choshesh, in other words, in order not to return a lost document. Let me go back for just a moment. The Mishnah said that if you find lost documents, you can't return them to their owners. Rabbah said that's fine as long as you satisfy two criteria. Number one, shayaros mitzuyos, has to be a lot of pedestrian traffic. Number two, huchsiku shnei Yosef ben Shimon. We know for a fact that there are two people with the same name, the name in the shtar, two people with the same name in this city. Once you have those two criteria, then we are choshesh that the document you lost is not the document you found, and therefore it cannot be returned to its original owner. But if either one of those two criteria are missing, the document can be returned. Rabbi Masnisin Abraisa or Mishani. So we'll say, Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Masnisin Abraisa or Mishani. So we'll say Rabbi Zera contrasted the Mishnah with the Braisa, but he answered up the contradiction. Tzanan, we learned, the Mishnah Gittin, Hamevi get va'avarimenu. So we'll say, if somebody's bringing a get, right, the Shaliach is delivering a get and he lost it, Matzah la'alter kasher, if he finds it immediately, the get is kasher, ve'im lav pasel, but if not, the get is pasel. So we'll say that's one statement. So the statement in the Mishnah Gittin seems to indicate that the ability to go ahead and deliver a lost get that was found is solely dependent on what? The pace, right? The pace at which, not the pace is the wrong word, but the haste, right? The quickness, right? In which you go ahead and find it. In other words, if you find it quickly, then Lamaisa, again, you could go ahead and give it back. If not, no. So the Gemara says, or minu. So we'll say that's the Mishnah Gin. Okay, that's number one. Or minu. Let's raise a contradiction. Matzah get, we'll say this is the Braisa. Matzah get, Isha b'shuk, bizman shabal moda yaksir. Yet the Braisa says that if you find a woman's get in the shuk, bizman shabal moda, if the husband admits that what? That he in fact used this get to divorce this woman, then yaksir the Isha. Then you should return the get to the woman. Ein habal moda, if the bal is not moda, lo yaksir lo lazeh lo lazeh, then you cannot return it to the man or to the woman. What do we see from this Braisa? Katani mias, bizman shabal moda yaksir the Isha. What do you see from here? When the husband admits that he owes it, then ultimately again you should return it to the woman. Va'afilu lizman meruba. You will say that, and this infers for us what? Even if a significant amount of time elapses. So both say, see, understand the contradiction. According to the Mishnah and Gittin, everything is dependent on the altar. If you lose it and you find it immediacy, that was what I was looking for, immediacy. Everything is dependent on immediacy. If you lose it and you find it immediately, then you could give it back to the parties involved. If there's no immediacy, a lack of immediacy, then what? Then you can't return it. That's the Mishnah. The Braisa seems to indicate that everything is dependent on the husband. If the husband admits that he divorced her with this get, then great, you could return it afil lizman meruba, which indicates to us, even without immediacy, the get can be returned to the husband or to the woman. To which the Gemara says, how do we reconcile this contradiction? Mishani kan b'makom she'asheres mitzuyos, kan b'makom she'asheres mitzuyos. I'm saying, how do we reconcile the contradiction? Easy, right? How? When do we require immediacy? I will say, immediacy is only needed when what? When there is heavy pedestrian traffic. Because when there's heavy pedestrian traffic, that's when we're choshesh, that there's a greater statistical probability that the get that you lost is not the get that you found. That's when you require immediacy. But if there's not a lot of pedestrian traffic, then what? All you require is the consent of the husband that this process really occurred, and the get can be returned. Ika da Amri, others explain, others say that no, the case ultimately where the Braisa said that you can't return the get is a situation where we know for sure that there are two people with the same name in the same city. Then we have to be concerned that the get that you lost ultimately again is not the get that you found. And that would be in conformance with the position of Rabbah. Because also remember again, Rabbah is the one who said that in order not to return the get, you need two things. Remember again, right? Shayaros Mitzuyos and Shnei Yosef ben Shimon. Ikadam, but another version of this exchange. Afagav de lo hochsiku lo nedar. Others say that what? No, the reconciliation between the Bryce and the Mishnah could also be read as, even if there are not two Yosef and Shimon's, the get should still not be returned, upliga de Rabba. And ultimately, again, this would refute the position of Rabba. Fine. So we'll say, so just two different versions as to how to reconcile the Mishnah with the Brisa. According to the first version of reconciliation between the Mishnah and the Brisa, it supports Rabba. According to the second one, it contradicts Rabba. So Bishlama, Rabba lo Omer Rabbi Zera. So also I understand why Rabba didn't say like Rabbi Zera. Masnisin ali malelak shuye. Because remember, Rabba brought a contradiction between our Mishnah and another Mishnah. So I understand why Rabba chose to contrast Mishnayis, because it's always better to ask a question from a Mishnah on a Mishnah. Ella Rabbi Zera. My time lo Amar Rabba. But I both say, why didn't Rabbi Zera say like Rabbi? Notice, why does Rabbi Zera choose to bring a kasha from a Brisa instead of from a Mishnah? Amar lacha mi katani ha'amar tnu nosnin va'afilu lizman meruba. So I will say, because Rabbi Zera was like this, Rabbi, your whole discussion is based on an inference from our Mishnah, right? Remember how our discussion in the Mishnah began? Our Mishnah said, Matzah gite nashim, you find any of these gittin, right? You don't go ahead and return. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah says why? Because we assume that the person who wrote it had a change of heart and decided not to give it. Rabbi says, you see from here that's what? That if the husband said, no, give the get, if I bring the get to the husband and I say, give the get, I say, I found your get, and he says what? Tenu, nosnin. So we'll say, Rabba made that observation from the Mishnah. Rabbi Zera says, Mikat hani ha'amar tenu nosnin va'afilu lizman meruba. Did the Mishnah ever say that statement? Right? Meaning, Rabba, you said that statement. You're inferring that from the Mishnah. The Mishnah never made that statement. Dilma ha'amar tenu nosnin. Dilma ha'amar tenu nosnin. Uli olam kidekaima lon li alter. Maybe, Rabba, when your inference is correct, that if the husband were to say, Tnu, give the get, we would give it, but that's only if what? If the get was found immediately. In other words, Rabba, you are inferring that even if the get was found months later, and the husband says, give it, that we would give it. But that is not clear in the Mishnah. Maybe the Mishnah is only talking about a case where you find the get immediately. L'mandam Rabbi Zera, Makom she'esharas mitzuyos, va'afagav shlo hochseku shnei Yosef. So we'll say, according to the opinion that held, that according to Rabbi Zera, even in a place where there is a lot of pedestrian traffic, and what? Even if there are not, and there, ben Shimon, that what? And even if there are not two established people with the same name, that we still don't give back the get, upliga de Rabba, and he would argue on Rabba. So both say, there, according to this version of Rabbi Zera, the fundamental machlokes between Rabba and Rabbi Zera will be the following. According to Rabba, in order not to be able, it is usher to return a found get when two criteria are present, which is what? Shayaros Mitsuyos, pedestrian traffic, and Huchseku Shnei Yosef ben Shimon, two people with the same name. According to Rabbi, if you have those two criteria, you can't return the get. According to Rabbi Zera, even if there is just pedestrian traffic, a lot of pedestrian traffic, even if what? We don't know for sure if there are two people with the same name, you still can't return the get. So Rabbi Zera is more machmir than Rabba. So the Gemara asks, "B'may kamiflagi, what is at the root of their machlokas?" Rabba Savar. So Rabba will say, Rabba Savar, diktani komai sebezdin hareze yachzir. So Rabba will say, because in general we hold of the principle that every ma'ase bezdin, everything done in a bezdin, generally should be returned to its rightful owner. Tishtachach bebezdin askinan, and we're dealing with a case of where the found get, or the get that was found in bezdin. Ubezdin kimakom shashayaros mitzuyos. Bezdin, remember, in general is considered to be a place where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic. V'hu shehuchseku lo yachzir, lo huchseku yachzir. And therefore again, we're dealing with a case. So according to Rabba, where the following situation: under normal circumstances, any document done by Bezdin will return to its original owners. That's how the Rabba says. Furthermore, what's happening over here? We're talking about a case where the get is being found in Bezdin. That's considered to be makom shashayaros mitzuyos, pedestrian traffic, and therefore the only variable is what? Are there two people with the same name in the same city? If the answer to that is yes, then unfortunately then we can't return the get, because you have to be choshish that the one that you found is not the one that you lost. But if there are not two people with the same name, then what? Then you can return the document. That's Rabbi Shita. Rabbi Zera Amar Lacha, Mi Katani Kol Ma'aseh Beis Din Shenin Tzuba Beis Din. And Rabbi Zera will say, 1 second, does the Brisa say any Ma'aseh, any document done by Beis Din that is found in Beis Din can be returned? Kol Ma'aseh Beis Din Yachzir Katani Uli Olam Deishtachach Avroi. According to Rabbi Zera, Rabbi say, the case could even be what? Where the document doesn't have to be found in Beis Din, the document was found outside of Beis Din. And according to Rabbi Zera, the only issue is what? Remember, Rabbi Zera says more machmir. According to Rabbi Zera, even if it's shesh shayeros mitzuyos, even if you don't have huchsaku shnei Yosef ben Shimon, you still can't return the document. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Rabbi Yirmiyah comes along. So far what we have over here is a fundamental machlokus between Rabbah and Rabbi Zera. Under what circumstances can a get, and when I say get, by the way, you understand, get includes all documents done by Beis Din, right? Under what can a get not be returned? Rabbah says, sheros mitzuyos, huchsaku shnei Yosef ben Shimon. Rabbi Zera says, even just sheros mitzuyos, even if it's not huchsaku shnei Yosef ben Shimon, still can't return it. Comes along Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar, kegon de ka'amri edim me'olam el chasanu, ella al get echad shel Yosef ben Shimon. Oh, Rabbi say, listen to this. Rabbi Yirmiyah comes along and says, Rabbi Yirmiyah comes along and says that when the Brisa said, Matzah get isha b'shuk, bizman shabal modi yachzer li isha, that if you find the get of a woman in the shuk, and the husband admits that he wrote this get, when can you return it to the woman? What's the case? Rabbi Yirmiyah says, where the edim on the shtar, the edim that signed on the get, say what? Yeah. We've only signed one get of Yosef ben Shimon. Right? In other words, we remember, we keep meticulous records. We only signed on one get of Reuven that divorced Leah. So Rabbi say, so when they say that, even if what? Even if technically there's two Reuven and two Reuven and Leah couples, nevertheless, these Edim are saying we only signed on one get. So that should be enough of a proof that what? That the get what was found was the get that was lost. Ihachi Maila Memra. So okay, we'll say if that's the case, then there's no novelty here. Oh, there is. Listen to this. Ma'u D'Tema Lechash Dilma Isrami Shma Kishma Ve'edim Ke'edim. Oh, we'll say, listen to this. Are we choshesh that maybe the same way that we're choshesh for Shnei Yosef ben Shimon? So we'll say, so maybe the same way that we're choshesh that what? That there are two Ruvain and Leah couples. So we'll say, remember who signed on the get? Levi and Yehuda. Maybe I should be choshesh that what? That just like there may be two gittin of Reuven who divorced his wife Leah, there are also maybe two gittin that also have what? Levi and Yehuda, witnesses who signed it. To which the Gemara says, no. Kamashla, no. That meaning that far we don't go. In other words, to be choshesh that there are two couples with the same names, that absolutely we will be choshesh for. But to go ahead and say that we're going to be choshesh for two couples with the same names who have the same names as of the witnesses, that far we don't go. So therefore we'll say, the way Rav Ashi understands the Brisa is that if let's say again, the get was lost, the Shliach was delivering the get was lost, Shliach retrieves it, husband says, yes, that's the get I want to deliver to my wife, we allow for, and it's a case, Rabbi Yirmiyah says, where the witness is showing up and saying, we signed that, and we've never signed another get of a couple with these names, we trust that testimony and allow for the delivery of that get. Rav Ashi says, Kigon da Amar, Nakav Yeshbo B'tzad Os Plonis. Rav Ashi comes along and says, what's the case? But say the case over here is where the husband identifies the get. Husband identifies the get. Or we'll say, it doesn't have to be the husband, it can be the shaliach also. And what happens, he says, there's a hole, on the top of the fourth aleph. Whatever, something like that. So he gives a simon. He gives a simon in the shtar itself. And therefore, again, Rav Ashi will say, that's why we allow the get to be returned, because there's a simon that tells us that what? That the get that was lost was the get that was found. V'dafka b'tzad os plonis. Rabbi said that's only true of what? If literally a simon like that, where again the simon is being found literally on the top of that particular letter. Aval nakav ba'alma. But we'll say, if I say that there's like a hole in the piece of paper, that's not going to be a good enough siman. In other words, that the case of where we're willing to return the lost get is where the shaliach, or the husband, someone, is coming along and giving us what we call a siman mufhak, a real defining siman. The Gemara says, Rabashi misafkale v'simanim ida oraisa ida rabbanon. So we'll say, interestingly enough, Ravashi says, we're not sure, do simanim work d'oraisa or do simanim work d'rabbanan? In other words, when you give a siman and something gets returned to you, so ultimately again, I will say, does that work on a rabbinic level or does that work on a biblical level? Now the nafkamina between that, I will say, will be how much of a defining siman do you need? And I will say, just to tie this together, Ravashi therefore is not sure, do simanim work d'oraisa or do they work d'rabbanan? Therefore, Rav Ashi will say the only time you could return the get is when the shaliach gives what we call a siman mufhak. Siman mufhak, I will say, means an undisputable siman, right? A siman that no one could have guessed. It must be that it's absolutely his document. So let's listen to this. Rabbi Bar Chana Irkas, top of Yutes, Irkas like Gita be Midrasha. Rabbi Bar Chana will say was delivering a get and he lost it. Imagine like how you must feel after that. Irkas like Gita, Shahaya Shaliach Lahavivi Irkas Lahu Vashkahu. So what happens? He went ahead and he lost the get. Based on Medrash. Amar, so we'll say, so they found the get. So they wanted to return it to him. But obviously, again, he had to demonstrate that it was the get that he lost. So Rabbi Bar Chana says the following. He says, Isimna isli b'gavei. If you want a siman, I could give you a siman. Right? I have a good siman on the body of the document that I could give you. Tvias eina. Now we'll say, Tvias eina means if I could look at it and identify it as the get that I lost. That's called Tvias ayin. Isli b'gavei. I could go ahead and I could identify it by sight as well. To which the Gemara says, Adrua nehile. They gave the get back to Rabbi Bar Chana. Amar lo yedana. Rabbi Bar Chana said, I don't know. Imishum simna ahadur nehile. Did they give it back to me because I said I had a siman? Vikasavi simanan d'oraisa. And they hold that siman works even with biblical matters. Omishum tvias eino ahadru nehile v'dafka tzora mirabanan. Or did they give it back to me because I would be able to identify it? Rabbi said it's actually a very important yesod. Tvias ayin, the ability to identify something by sight and to say that is what I lost, only works by a Talmud Chacham. What does it mean always by Talmud Chacham? It only works by someone ultimately, again, whose credibility is absolutely intact. Because remember, again, Tvias Ayin essentially means I'm going to look at the document and I'm going to say, oh yeah, that's the one that I lost. That is only reserved, that type of credibility is only reserved for Talmidei Chachamim, but ultimately, again, would not be something that is usable by the general populace. Aval inish ta'alma, lo. But Lamais, again, other people know. Rashi says, V'dafkul tzor mirabanan, the muchsak lan bei, t'lo mashani b'diburi. Because the Talmud Chacham, again, will be careful ultimately with his words. So I will say, so bottom line over here, Rabbi Bar Chana, good news is he got back the get. Interestingly enough, he wasn't sure if it was because he had a siman, or because he had the ability ultimately again for Tvias Ayin. So we'll say, so we're going to stop over here, but we're still, remember, we have this, first of all, we'll end off still with Machlokus between Rabbi Bar Chana, or I should say, Rabba and Rabbi Zera, about under what circumstances can a lost document be returned, right? Or under what circumstances can't a lost document be returned? According to Rabba, Sheros Mitzuyos Shnei Yosef ben Shimon. According to Rabbi Zera, even just Sheros Mitzuyos. We also know that we have the seeming contradiction between the Mishnah and the Braisa from Gittin. We now have 4 different ways of ultimately reconciling those. Now we also left off with the interesting discussion, do simanim work d'oraisa or d'rabbanan? And now we've also just been introduced to the idea that Tvias Ayin, visual recognition of something, works to allow for the return of a lost object, but only ultimately for Talmidei Chacham whose credibility is intact. But so let me just share with you a short idea on the parsha.